Welcome to the High Performance Disciple podcast. My name is Gareth Morgan, and my goal is to help you close the gap between your God-given potential and your daily performance. What I do is I explore the explosive combination of timeless spiritual principles and high performance practices that will enable you to take control, to be courageous, and to release the greatness that is in you. This conversation is designed to help high achieving, high impact leaders, entrepreneurs, athletes, and pioneers turn fear into faith, confusion into clarity, frustration into focus, and stress into strategy. If you enjoy what you hear, I would love for you to like it, to subscribe, to comment, and share it with others that you believe in. Here's today's conversation. Welcome to the High Performance Disciple episode 4. I want to jump right into a big subject. It's about momentum. Momentum, one of those factors in our life and leadership, in our performance, our productivity, that when you know you've got momentum, it makes everything easier. You go faster, you go further, you expand into the future that you know that you've got inside of you. It can sometimes feel difficult to build and very easy to lose. So how do we build personal momentum? How can we immediately, whilst it may take time to actually manifest in some physical, visible output, how do I start to build it internally? Because everything that happens externally comes from an internal place. And that's what I want to talk about. There are just a couple of quotes. Darren Hardy talks about the fact that consistency is the key to achieving and maintaining momentum. Consistency starts with a decision, and a decision that then we repeatedly make. So momentum can actually begin the moment we decide, and we decide again, and we decide again. In a very short period of time, we can start to build what may seem like a tortoise pace, because it doesn't feel like we're accelerating and going anywhere fast, but we are starting to build what ultimately over time will compound into incredible momentum. And what happens, it kickstarts a process. Tony Robbins says people who succeed have momentum. The more they succeed, the more they want to succeed, and the more they find a way to succeed. Can you see just even in his statement there, the moment we catch ourselves succeeding, it becomes a self-propelling force, because then we want to move into the next success. And we start to believe that we can find a way. We have to find a way. And our belief level starts to rise on the back of the last success. And so the key is consistent successes over time. And I know from my own journey and my own life that sometimes I see momentum being built by big milestone moments. And that's been a big challenge for me, because milestones are called milestones for a reason. They don't happen every meter. Otherwise, they would be called meter stones. Milestones happen that signify kind of the journey that we've come, and we set milestones in terms of where we want to be a year from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now. And milestones are important to chart. But when it comes to building momentum, it's about the consistent choices that are going to build even small measures of success that then compound into the next success. And daily we can do this. It can start with a choice and a decision to act. And so I want to jump into this subject because I think this is one of the subjects that I wish I had learnt a whole lot earlier. So, I'm 43 right now. So if I'd have learnt this at 23 or even 13, I know that this would have hugely accelerated what I could have done. Now, I'm not down about that because, I've got a whole heap of years, God willing, in front of me. So, and I get to help you right now. So you can learn something, catch hold of something through this session that can help you accelerate, go further, faster. But also, yes, it's about the result of momentum externally, because it does produce results. It makes life a whole lot easier when you've got momentum. You've had momentum at some point in your life, in relationships, in finances, in your professional life, when everything just seems to be easier. Why? Because if you peel back what you've been doing, you've been making consistently good decisions repeatedly over time. And so it didn't just suddenly happen. Momentum doesn't suddenly happen. Again, it's a myth. It's a myth that if we're not careful and we believe that, we think momentum is the sole property of the favored ones. Yeah, the ones who by luck or by some divine favor are the ones who were blessed with it and I wasn't. No. You have, and we talk about this on the High Performance Disciple, you have the code of success. I talk about that through the biblical principles. And if you are a Christian, you have a relationship with God, then you have the covenant of significance. In other words, you have all the tools and you have the backup that you need to create momentum. But only you can make the choice and the repeated choices that are going to produce it over time. So let's unpack this a bit more. Let me share with you a quick story. And this is a story of a tennis player, and I'm not a massive tennis fan, but I love looking at the route and the road of champions, and especially when people have overcome adversity, or maybe they've come out of nowhere, and just love the story of that. And I was watching a documentary about an American tennis player called Mardy Fish. Mardy Fish came through the US Academy tennis ranks, and it was an academy that sought to sift through all of the talent in America and to allow the creme de la creme, the potential champions to rise to the surface. Now, for years, America dominated tennis. You had your Pete Sampras, you had your Andre Agassi, you had all those Jim Courier going back, and Connors and McEnroe, and that's where my knowledge stops. But basically, the US pretty much dominated the top echelons of tennis. But then it hit a point where that would change, and this kind of converged with when Mardy Fish and his friend who came through the tennis ranks, Andy Roddick, when they stepped onto the scene. Mardy Fish, Andy Roddick became friends at the academy. Mardy Fish spent a year, in fact, at the Roddick family home. So they really built a close relationship together, but it was also a competitive relationship. They loved to beat one another at whatever it was that they were participating in. And for years, in the early phase of their careers, Andy Roddick was the one who dominated out of the two. He won some Grand Slams. He was the number one US men's tennis player. And whenever he played Mardy Fish, which they did on numerous occasions, Andy Roddick would win every single time. In fact, there were 9 consecutive wins in top events when Andy Roddick would beat Mardy Fish. It kind of became a bit of a joke. Even Mardy Fish, would joke about it afterwards that once again he'd lost, and so it became a bit of a running joke. And Mardy Fish was this kind of happy-go-lucky guy, and in one sense, he was just like happy to be taking part. He was content and blessed by the fact that here he was, playing a sport that he loved, getting paid for it, and just enjoying the environments of that top-level competitive environment. And at 28, he just had this moment when he realized, wow, I'm probably in if it's a 12-month year, like his career, if we liken his career to a 12-month year, he's like in the September of the year. So he's got like a quarter left of time to make an impact as a player. And he had this conversation with himself that kind of said, well, if I've got a quarter left, a few more years, how will I ever know how good I could have been if I don't raise the level of expectation I place upon myself? He said, I could just enjoy the rest of these years and just be happy to be taking part. But then I'll look back and think, well, could I have done more? Could I have been more? And he made this decision. And from that moment, that decision kickstarted an intense regime of training, of preparation, months of taking his body weight down, kind of a significant amount, to become lean and strong and athletic to the point where he would kind of outrun opposition. And he was closing in on the start of the season. And he said to himself, I have to win a tournament, because up until this point, he hadn't done that. He'd got so close. In fact, he had match point early on in his career in a major tournament, but didn't win. And so here he is saying, I've got to go and win a tournament. So he chose a tournament in Newport in America, small tournament. In fact, so small that, in a major tournament, you always have that court that is surrounded by big stands where thousands of people gather around, and that court is the sole focus. Well, this Newport venue, the main court was surrounded by other courts. I mean, that's how insignificant, let's call it, in the eyes of the tennis world this tournament was. But he knew something. He knew, I've got to start to build momentum. And it starts with that tournament that I can go and I can win. It will test me, but I've got to see Mardy Fish as a winner rather than just somebody happy to take part. You see, that had been his story so far, and now he needed to shift that story. And he ended up winning that first tournament. And long story short, in fact, the documentary is out there. I think it's on one of the platforms where you can go and watch documentaries, Amazon Prime or Netflix. And you go watch it and you start to see, wow, his mindset shifts. He starts to build this momentum of belief and this momentum of his decision making. And that's what I want to talk about, because then he went on and won another tournament until his long-term goal was to be one of the 7 or 8 players who were selected for the end of the ATP Tour tournament at the O2 in London. Showcase event, big event, and he'd always wanted just to be amongst the best. That was his goal, but he knew the distance between where he was and that goal was like a chasm. And so the only way to kind of bridge that was to build this momentum. And long story short, that's what he did. He built personal momentum, but it all started with a choice. It all started with belief. It didn't start even with capability. It started with belief. And that's what momentum is. Momentum is when I see a goal that seems far off. It inspires me. It generates passion. It generates excitement in me, to the point where it then puts a demand upon me that says something has to shift in me for me to start to make progress and to journey through all of the mini successes en route to the big success. Let me kind of share a quick thought here on momentum. I want to look at it from the Bible and the story of David. So David, one of the kind of key leaders in the Bible, and there's something that we see in his story that we also see in the story of Mardy Fish. That is the formula for personal momentum. Now, before I read it to you, let me kind of give you a definition. And in fact, the formula for momentum. Momentum is weight times velocity. Weight times speed, okay? So a quick example of this, that one winter morning, I was heading down to the center where our church holds its gatherings. and I had the children in the car. Leanne was already down there. And we were heading down that morning, and it was a wintry morning, but it was one of those mornings where it wasn't kind of white with ice, but you knew that it had been freezing. And so therefore there could be icy patches. And we went into the car park, and at the end of the car park, there's this dyke, and there's a little drop into that dyke where there's water. We had a fence there. There were paving slabs. But essentially, if you ran a car off the end, you'd be in the dyke. Well, we drove into the car park, and we normally drive right round the building to park in the furthest part. And anyway, we got onto the car park, and I was going towards the end of the car park where the dyke was, and then I would turn left. Problem was, I'm trying to slow down, and I realize I'm on black ice. The car is heading towards the dyke, and I was trying to put the brakes down. They were crunching because they couldn't get any grip. I then pressed the handbrake button. That's what I had in the car at the time. And it was doing nothing. Literally, the weight of the car plus the speed that we had already gathered had enough momentum to take me where I didn't want to go. I couldn't do anything about it. And quickly, all I could think of was, I've got to do something. So I opened the door crazily and stuck my foot out. And as the car went to go over the dyke, I put my foot against the curb to try and put some resistance the other way. I bent my leg round. Goodness knows how I didn't break my leg. But thankfully, the car then got caught on the curb and was hanging over the edge of this dyke. And the kids were freaking out more about the fact that their console devices that they had in their hands at the time, that they were safe. That was what they were more concerned about. But I realized, wow, momentum is difficult to stop because it is that weight plus times speed. And what we learn when it comes to personal momentum, and we learn this in the life of David, and we can see this as a code of success, that personal momentum is the weight of certain belief multiplied by the speed of consistent choices. Let me say that again. Momentum is the weight of certain belief. In other words, what I believe to be certain, I'm convinced about. That's what a conviction is. It's what I have become convinced of. So I have to build certain convictions, absolute belief, but multiply it by the speed of consistent decision making. So if I make one decision one day, then the next decision is 3 weeks later, that's not going to build momentum. It's about consistency and the speed between each of those choices that then gathers the speed backed by the weight of belief. I hope this is making sense. And we see this in the story of David and Goliath. And I'm just going to take a few moments in this episode, and I'm going to take in the next episode some more time to unpack this, because I think this is a huge subject. But the situation we find in 1 Samuel chapter 17, and it's a well-known story because it's one of those stories that, they use the illustration of David and Goliath when it comes to boxing matches or sporting competition, because usually, it represents an underdog coming against an established champion. And this is what took place in 1 Samuel 17. Let me paint the scene for you. You've got two mountainsides with a valley in between. And on one mountainside, you've got the Israelites. And then on the other, you've got the Philistines. You've got these opponents. And they're coming each day, facing off against one another. And at the center of this competition, in the valley, stood between these opposing sides, was this huge behemoth of a man called Goliath, who was calling out to the Israelites, taunting them, basically saying, send somebody out to fight me. If you beat me, basically you've taken us all. But if I beat you, then, we've taken you. What would happen each day, and this wasn't just one occasion, like this was a repeated event. They would turn up each day to this scene, and the Israelites would sing victory songs, the story reads, as they approached the mountainside. They would sing victory songs on the mountainside. But how many of you know there's a difference between what you sing or say and what you then action? They didn't action anything. Outwardly, they had a persona of victory, but internally, they were scared. They wouldn't go and face Goliath until David rocks up. And David, and we'll unpack this more in the next episode, because there's a lead up to this scenario, which we have to pay attention to, because so often we want the stage of the public performance or the public breakthrough, but we don't want the backstory. We don't want the build up. We don't want the period of obscurity, which is the development process that is essential to preparing us for that platform. And David had gone through the preparatory process of being prepared for this moment. But in this moment, David comes and he delivers lunch to his brothers who were part of the Israelite army. And he hears the taunting of this giant, and something within him rises and starts to get annoyed, because here is this man basically pulling down the nation of Israel, but also the God that they serve. And for David, this was a big thing. We know this because in Acts, in the New Testament, it talks about that David was a man after God's own heart. So he had that covenant of significance. He had a relationship with God. And so you mess with God and his name, then something within David rises up. For David, it wasn't about him. It was about the nation and the fact that this nation represented God's reputation. So something within him rose, a weight of belief that said, I don't care how big you are, the God that I serve is greater, and his reputation is far more valuable than me preserving my life. So therefore, I'm going to do something about this. And what's really interesting is the speed at which this takes place. Now, there are some interactions as David finds out, and what's really interesting, because this is something that very often people within, religious circles don't emphasize, because the story almost doesn't fit sometimes the story of being religious. And David goes and asks the question, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? So he's kind of saying, like, what's the reward? Now, sometimes when you hear this story, people tell it as if, right, it was just the fact that David wanted to take Goliath out because he was taunting the nation of Israel and God. And that's absolutely true. But he was also interested in, well, what's the reward? And we often kind of gloss over that. But reward is so important when it comes to building momentum. Reward is so important when it comes to us overcoming fear. A reward in the future is that vision that places a demand on the now. And he asks the question, if I do this, what is going to be the outcome? Now, I believe that he'd have done it regardless. But when he got absolute crystal clarity on the fact that what would be done for this man is this man would live, whoever beat Goliath would be tax-free for the rest of his life. I mean, that's pretty good. He would be married into the royal family because he would have the daughter of Saul, who was the king at the time. He would get to marry her. And essentially, he'd have everything that he would need for the rest of his life. I mean, this is job security, financial security on the other side of taking on this guy. And this vision of the physical and material outcomes, plus the internal conviction that this needs to be dealt with, because my conviction is that I defend God's name and his people. Combine that together, and there was a weight of belief that was strong enough, provided that it was matched with speed of action. Now, what's really interesting, again, there's so much in this story we could go into, and we'll unpack some more in the next episode. But it says that once David had made the decision, that he's going to take this guy on, he doesn't kind of walk gingerly down into the valley, thinking, oh my word, flipping out, what have I done? I hope this goes well. It actually says that once he'd got those stones that were going to go into his sling, that he ran towards Goliath. So it was the speed of decision making. I'm going to do something about this. He got the stones. He ran towards his target, and that speed of decision plus the weight of belief combines together. And this is on the back of a lifestyle of building up a weight of belief and speed of consistent choices, which we'll talk about in the next episode with the backstory. But this combination builds momentum, and he takes this giant down with one stone. And of course, this then takes David to a whole nother level of public promotion, because he ends up becoming king, and he becomes one of the greatest leaders that Israel has ever seen, in fact, the world has ever seen, and of course, is a big part of the Bible story. And so it's an incredible lesson to us when it comes to how I build personal momentum. The weight of belief. Now, you may say, Gareth, well, help me a little bit more with that. So this is the weight of who I am bringing to the challenges that I face. I need to have the version of me. Now, if I'm a Christian, then that will be the version of me that the Bible reveals, made in the character of God. So, that's an incredible version. And we need to dig into that more to build that weight of belief. I need to bring who I really am, who I've been created to be. If you're not a Christian, then that's about you deciding, well, what characteristics do I believe are authentic to who I am? What are the values that are authentic to who I am? And I need to decide that that's the person that's going to show up. On the mountainside, the Israelites showed up in the old version of themselves. In other words, the default version, the scared version, the fearful version, the self-focused, self-preserving version. And we all have that version inside of us that will keep us from taking on the big challenges, which are the big opportunities, which are connected to the big breakthroughs. So we need to choose which version of ourselves is going to turn up. And that's the weight of belief, like who I really am, who my spirit inside, the authentic core of me says that I am. Or if you are a follower of Jesus, who God says that I am. I need to decide that's who's going to turn up. But then I need to match that weight of belief with speed of decision. Okay, based upon who I am, based upon the vision of the future, the crystal clear picture that is inspiring me, that is compelling me, what is the next decision I need to make quickly and then consistently? And the more I can break that down daily, and this is where planning, having an executable plan comes in. We really need to have a mechanism where we're not sat there thinking, oh, what do I need to do next? But I'm planning the next few moves. Any champion in any sport, you look at snooker. I don't know if you like snooker or not, but regardless of whether you like it or not, one of the most incredible things about those players is that when they're playing a shot, they've already thought through the next 2 or 3 shots. In fact, the greater the champion, the more shots ahead that they're thinking about. And they have to wrestle between the tension of the shot that's coming up in a couple of turns whilst executing the shot that they're currently taking. That's a skill, that's a challenge, but that's the mindset of a champion. And so it's that combination of the weight of who I am connected to the speed of what I really must do now to make progress. And when I bring those together over time, consistently, then I build personal momentum. It all starts with a choice. And today, let me remind you, you are a champion. There's a version of you that needs to show up in order for you to be en route to fulfilling the potential that you've got inside of you, which is far greater than anything that you could imagine right now. And I want to cheer you on. I want to champion you. I want to challenge you. I want to irritate you. I want you to make you feel uncomfortable, not making you feel bad, but making you feel uncomfortable so that you take action more consistently and more speedily so that you can build that momentum that will bring the breakthrough. Come on, let's take control. Let's be courageous. Let's release greatness. I hope today's episode was helpful to you. You can get more by subscribing to my channel, and I have more content and tools that can help you on your journey if you'd like to head over to garethmorgan.tv. Remember, today and every day you are a champion, and there is more in you than you think.